And one of the things I just started doing is using those matrices that we talked about, where they say where they are, whether they need a lot of help, a little help by themselves, or they can teach it. I had them look at where they were in certain skills and pick one skill that they thought they really needed to work on some more. And we're working on some goal setting with that. So in January, when they come back, they've already voted on where they think they need some extra help, and we're going to spend a week reviewing. So I'll meet with those small groups every day that week to give them extra practice. So I'll have a group that needs some more work on money. I have kids that need more work on telling time, and I have kids that need more work on subtraction. So I'm just going to group those kids based on that. And they identified those themselves. I didn't do it for them. I gave them their matrix and said, what do you need? And they told me. So it's actually easier. I like it because now that I have the data in front of me, it's easier to tell what they need and what they don't need as much of. So I'm really just using the data from the kids.
Right. Planning is huge, yes. I've always been a huge planner, but this even allows me to do more. So, like, I actually sit down in the summer and I look at all my learner targets and say, okay, so if these are the things that I want every kid to know, what activities, what labs, what lesson plans support this? And then I sit down and think about all the different things that are out there and say what will work best and what gives them like a variety of things to do. And if a kid is really computer-based, what could they do? And if a kid is really art-based, what could they do? And if somebody really likes to read, what they could do. And so I really break it down from essential question down to learner target, down to activity, down to the assessment. So it's the whole backwards planning all the way through.
Be organized. That was the hardest thing, was getting used to having just all this evidence for the kids and how do they keep track of it instead of me keeping track of it. So really, I think it would help to think through those steps. Where are you going to keep this stuff? How are you going to make it accessible to the students so they can keep track of it instead? Actually, my room's changed quite a bit since the beginning of the year.
Talk about that.
I did. I set it up like I set it up last year, and I quickly realized it wasn't quite going to work because I realized there was more stuff I needed to put on the walls that I didn't have on the walls. I've changed it quite a bit. I didn't have storage areas that were accessible to students really at the beginning of the year. And then once we started switching kids between the 3 first grade classes, I realized, where am I going to keep the stuff from kids in 3 classrooms? So I basically ended up going and buying a ton of crates. And I have crates, and hanging file folders. That's been working really well for me because then no matter if they're in my class or not, they have a place to keep their stuff. And that was probably the biggest challenge, is what do I do with the stuff?
How much time it takes to get all the pieces in place. And this is what I struggle with at the beginning of the year. What do you do first, second, third? What's the best order in which to train them, really? What do I train them on first? Goal setting, data-driven dialogue, learning targets, what comes first? Because there's a lot of front-loading. And I'm not sure I have it figured out yet if there's a best order. Don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to give the kids more control than you're comfortable with, and the kids will teach you a lot. They'll give you immediate feedback.
The second thing that for me was extremely important was the actual standards themselves. How were you going to look at learning? I have to do these particular things. Well, that meant it was incumbent on me to actually give them, here's what you need to learn. It was all laid out for them. There was no mystery behind it. And once they began to understand that they had to meet a basic standard to be able to move on, then again their behavior changed. And you were right back to the mode of some people like that, other learners didn't like it. They would much prefer to get the average of a bunch of scores and then just move on. Less interested in actually working to meet a standard of performance. But after a while, even those students began to really change in their perspective and their approach. And they adjusted really quite well to the idea that I have to do this work. Part of what I had to do to initiate that change from negative to a more positive attitude was to try to work with them and not just say, well, it's your work, you know, you figure out how to do it. And instead, I really had to look at different ways that we might assess it, different ways that I needed to lay it out for them, maybe some additional handouts, so some additional small group work where I talked with people one-on-one. There were a lot of different things that I tried, but the aggregate of it was that they just needed more of me at specific points in time, and they really didn't get me, you know, talking to the whole class as though everybody there was the same learner.